Welcome into another edition of Next Level Inside Carolina's show where Greg Barnes and myself go a little bit deeper into topics. We're sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt and JohnnyT-Shirt.com, and also shout out to Congruity, another sponsor of the show. Small and mid-sized business owners, check out congruityhr.com/Tar Heels. Get your free assessment. See how Congruity can help you with HR and payroll outsourcing. Our guest today is Mr. Chad Bishop. It is Georgia Tech week, so we go to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution to get a beat writer, and Chad is the best one down there. Chad, how you doing?
Well, by default, I mean, there aren't many Georgia Tech beat writers. There's a couple of us. It's not like these some of these massive programs that got 10 to 20 people walking around following the head coach. So I appreciate that nonetheless.
Hey, I set it up. I mean, you could have left it alone, and it'd have been like, this is the greatest ever get by Greg and I. But
champion myself. That's not really my style. So,
well, that's perfect for this show because we are both very understated here, but I do want to start with Georgia Tech. Obviously, North Carolina's had some struggles down there and struggles in Chapel Hill last year, but number one player that North Carolina fans are talking about, North Carolina coaches have talked about, is Haynes King. Just sort of speak to him coming in and really setting that program, giving that program some stability at the quarterback position.
Yeah, it's been an interesting storyline because Haynes King transferred from Texas A&M after 3 seasons there, even though he's only a redshirt sophomore, because of COVID and all the craziness with those things nowadays. And he came in January and wasn't named the starting quarterback until about a week and a half, 2 weeks before the opener. He beat out Zach Pyron, who played 3.5 games in 2022. And everybody thought Zach Pyron might be the starter, but Haynes King came in and won that true quarterback battle back in August. And you can see they've really sort of tailored this offense around Haynes King's strengths. He can run the ball a little bit, not his forte, but, had a 71-yard run last week against Boston College. He whips it really all over the yard, short passes, deep balls. Some of his teammates have compared him to Patrick Mahomes. I've heard one teammate compare him to Brent Favre. He's got sort of that Texas gunslinger vibe, in personality and in play. But that being said, I mean, you look at his 9 interceptions, that's not really indicative of the way he's played. A couple of those have been tip balls and batted balls. I mean, one guy for Boston College caught the ball on his hip last week in sort of a freak play. So he's been pretty good in his decision-making, pretty good in his accuracy, and by and large been really good as a leader, inside the locker room and outside. He'll step in front of the media when he has a bad game. He doesn't take a whole lot of credit when he has a great game. He's really given Georgia Tech's offense an identity.
Chad, I want to ask about the head coach situation. Brent Key, of course, stepped in for Jeff Collins last year and had a really strong close of the season. Of course, got the big upset win in Chapel Hill when Carolina was up 17-0 and Tech reeled off 21 straight to close out that game. He's promoted from interim to head coach this offseason. And they've been a little shaky. We'll kind of dive more into how the team has performed on the whole here momentarily. But in terms of Brent Key, what are your thoughts on him? What's kind of the feeling around the program? And he's an understated hire, of course. Doesn't have a ton of prior experience. But good start last year. What's kind of the general vibe about Brent?
Yeah, going into this year, I sort of argued that this wasn't sort of your typical first-year head coach situation, right? Like you mentioned, he was an interim coach last year. He coached in 8 games. I mean, there was a little bit of a foundation there. And he was an assistant, for a long time here before that. And then a long time here, prior to that as well. So, I mean, and he played offensive line at Georgia Tech. I mean, he's a Georgia Tech guy through and through. So I don't think he was necessarily starting from ground zero or below ground zero. This wasn't a complete rebuild overhaul process in the sense of, he was here last year, kept a lot of the same guys on the roster, kept a handful of assistant coaches. It wasn't like he had to completely overhaul this thing. And it's not like the job that Jeff Collins had where he had to go from the triple option and remake a whole lot of things. A lot of things were in place for him. Now, that being said, I do think you are seeing some of the growing pains right now in a team who has guys who are on the previous roster, guys who are brand new, true freshmen. Everyone's sort of adjusting to Brent Key and his way of doing things, his way of coaching, the offenses and defenses he wants to run. And to me, that sort of explains the inconsistencies they have. I mean, they were really good against Wake Forest. They beat Miami, but then they lose to Bowling Green, and they got run over roughshod by Boston College. So just sort of, I think that speaks to the overall, again, growing pains that Brent Key and any first-year coach is going to have. Now, they'll take 3 and 4 through 7 games under a first-year head coach for a team that, has hardly won at all the past 3.5 years. A lot of first-year coaches, right, are going to be happy to be 3 and 9 overall or 4 and 8 overall. So I think he's trending a little bit further ahead than maybe a lot of other first-year coaches would be in his position.
Yeah, I think what really kind of stands out to me, and granted, we're on the 24/7 sports network. I know you have familiarity there, but when you look at recruiting, I mean, they've done a pretty good job. They did a good job last year. They're doing pretty good this year. And you can manage those growing pains as long as you're doing a good job bringing in legitimate talent. And then, of course, eventually you got to be able to kind of step it up and play up. Jeff Collins had issues with that, right? I mean, he recruited gangbusters for a while and just never really materialized on the field. So be interesting watching Brent in that fashion. You mentioned the loss, the BC. I think Georgia Tech's season thus far has been very interesting. I mean, watching the Georgia Tech Louisville game, I'm like, wow, Tech looks really good. And then it kind of falls apart at the end. Mississippi and Oxford's tough. So they beat Wake and then kind of have the stunner against Bowling Green. Then you beat Miami on a fluke kind of ending, which is fantastic. And then, as you mentioned, losing to BC. Is this team just been up and down, very inconsistent, or is there something else in play here?
No, I think it's just truly just, and I think I was joking with someone this week. What's the line? We are who we thought we were, or they are who we thought they were. I mean, maybe Georgia Tech is just a 500 ball club, right? Like, I mean, I think everybody thought, okay, after 6 games, 3 and 3. Now, nobody thought that would be because a loss to Bowling Green and a win at a ranked Miami team. I think what's frustrating for Tech fans and for Brent Key and probably everybody in the building is to play as well as they did against Miami. And yeah, they needed a miracle to win it, but they held Miami to 3 points in the first half. Played great against Wake Forest. I mean, probably one of the better games I've seen them play. Like you mentioned, the Louisville game, people forget that. I mean, they look like gangbusters in the first half of that game before falling apart in the second half. So it's just those 1 quarter here, 2 quarters there, 1 series there. Good or bad, it's really all over the map. And so, at this point, 7 games in, right? I don't think there's any guessing of what the team will be. I think, to me, it's clear that this is a team that's going to end up 5-7, 6-6, or 7-5.
When you look at the on and off, I mean, North Carolina fans certainly can remember back to when Carolina went. It was 2004, I guess. And Greg, you were the beat guy then. They go to, I think, Utah or Louisville and get the brakes beat off of them, then come home and beat Miami. And then the week after that, they lose. And then later in that season, they upset NC State. What's the mood around the program when they're so up and down? I mean, I know everybody always says the right things, but it's got to be frustrating, for a coaching staff, but also for players to look so good, like you said, in some games. And I remember the Louisville game. I was like, Georgia Tech's for real. And then all anybody ever sees is the Bowling Green game and the Boston College game. Just what's the mood, both covering them and within the program, about the up and downness of it?
I haven't seen much frustration, honestly. I think the new guys inside the locker room are certainly hungry to resurrect the program and change those inconsistencies. And the old guys don't seem to be panicking a lot about it. And Brent Key himself, I mean, he tries to stay even keel. I know that's cliche and that's coach speak of not getting too high and not getting too low. But I think he knows he's building, like a lot of first-year head coaches. They're trying to build for the long term. They're not panicking over big-time losses, and they're not celebrating big wins like they've won a bowl game. I mean, I think everybody understands that this is, year 1 of a head coach, or maybe year 1.5 a head coach. They're going to make some facility upgrades. They're going to change the stadium around a little bit. I'm sure they're going to get some more money in for, assistant coaches and for recruiting efforts. So I think there's an understanding that, hey, listen, where this team has been the past 3.5 years and where they are now, like, yeah, everybody wants them to be better, but, let's take a step back and put it in realistic terms, right? I mean, the Georgia Tech football program was not good the last few years. So let's see where this goes. Let's see what Brent Key can do this year. And then next year, and then sort of reassess after that.
Yeah, so it's interesting watching fan bases and when you sort of compare the fan bases about expectations and all, and it helps at times to have fans that have realistic expectations. And
Yeah.
you know, a lot of people in Atlanta seem to have them as long as there's that vision going forward.
Sure.
I asked you about Haynes King earlier, sort of for our North Carolina listeners or North Carolina fans that are listening to this, sort of outline why it's not just Haynes King for this offense. Why is there some issues that could cause North Carolina some problems on the defensive side? I mean, Appalachian State did the blueprint, and then Virginia followed it to a T. How can Georgia Tech be that team against a defense like North Carolina with what they have in the skill positions?
Well, I think Georgia Tech has to run the ball. I mean, I think they have an outstanding passing game and some very good wide receivers. But if they can't run the ball consistently, and Brent Key has talked about running the ball efficiently, right? I mean, Georgia Tech had some good rushing numbers against Boston College, but they sort of came in chunks, and they're a little bit misleading there. I think they need to run the ball so they can pass the ball better, which, again, it's something we talk about cliche a lot in the sport of football. But if Georgia Tech can get Jamal Haynes, who's a converted wide receiver, he's at running back. Trey Cooley, who I believe is from it's from somewhere in Charlotte or somewhere in North Carolina. He started his career at Louisville, transferred into Georgia Tech. There's a 1-2 punch there at running back, and they have capable wide receivers. I mean, they got a handful of good ones, and Eric Singleton, a freshman. Chase Lane and Malik Rutherford are two guys people should know the names of. They have some capable tight ends that they haven't gone to a ton. So to me, they got to figure out a way to run the ball a little bit just to keep UNC's defense a little bit honest. They've done a good job of protecting Haynes King in the passing game from an offensive line perspective. So if Georgia Tech can get Jamal Haynes and Trey Cooley some running yards, I think they're going to be okay offensively.
I think a stat that would probably well, hang on, Tommy. You got a.
Well, no, I was going to say fun fact: Trey Cooley, Nightdale High School, which is literally 20 minutes from where I sit, right up the road. And yes, I very much remember him getting away to Louisville and now at Georgia Tech. But anyway, sorry to bump you, Greg. But go ahead.
I knew he was from up there somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I was just looking. One of the things I think people would probably be surprised about is when you look at in terms of offensive efficiency, Georgia Tech ranks 24th nationally in yards per play, and that's 6.56. And here's the surprising part, Tommy. They are ranked higher than North Carolina in that stat. Carolina's averaging 6.45. One of the, I guess the interesting things is that there's been a lot of turnovers that Georgia Tech has gained. They lead the ACC in picking up 14, but they also rank second in the ACC in turnovers lost. Do you see that as the turnover aspect? Do you think that's really the main thing that's kind of hampered this offense from exploding more than they have?
Yeah, at times, but I would go back, to the consistency aspect of it. Every game I've watched Georgia Tech this year, and I've said this for a while now, I go to the stadium every Saturday, and I'm pretty confident Georgia Tech's going to be in the game. I never feel like they're going to get blown out. Now, I'm not necessarily confident they're going to blow anybody out on the other side, right? But with that offense and what they've done with the efficiency of that offense leads me to believe that they can put up some points. You mentioned the turnovers. Of course, that's going to be big for any offense, but they haven't been too incredibly careless with the ball. Again, Haynes King's interceptions, some have been a little fluky, tip balls, what have you. They pretty much kept the ball off the turf when it comes to fumbling. And then defensively, those takeaways, 5 came against Wake and 5 came against Miami. So yeah, they got 14, but 10 were in 2 games. So they haven't done a great job getting after the quarterback on defense, and they've been pretty terrible on third down and defense. But my point is that with the offense and how explosive it can be at times, that's allowed them to stay in games and win games if they're able to play that way 4 quarters offensively, every single drive, every single time they touch the ball. Then I think that lopsided victory comes, but I have yet to see that out of that Georgia Tech offense.
Yeah, Tommy asked you a minute ago about kind of the feeling and the vibe around the program. To get more specific, when you have an ending like what happened at Miami, you can call it a fluke. You can call it everything that had to go right went perfectly right for Georgia Tech in the final seconds there. What does that do for the morale of the team? I mean, did you sense a change in them after that, knowing that they probably stole one?
Yeah. Unfortunately for them, they had a bye week right after that. And I think that actually hurt them. Like to win the way they did that, against that team that late at night and what we're calling the miracle in Miami. I mean, after the game and then the Tuesday or Wednesday after that, whatever it was, they met with us. I mean, you could, sense like, all right, this is the one that's going to get us rolling. But then you have a bye week and you come back and you got a noon kickoff against Boston College in a stadium that's it's not empty, but it's not the same atmosphere as it was down in Miami. And I just wonder if they didn't have the bye game after that Miami win, if things would have been different. I think that's simplifying things, but yeah, I mean, I think they would like to think, excuse me, that Miami win helped them turn a corner and boost them maybe into a bowl game. But again, look, they went and lost to Boston College a week later. Maybe they beat North Carolina and we say, look at that North Carolina win. That's the one that boosts. But again, it's win, loss, win, loss, win, loss, win, loss. So we'll see.
It'll be interesting to see. We're talking with Chad Bishop at the AJC down in Atlanta about some Georgia Tech football. Chad, let's flip it over. And a lot of things that people have asked me over the last actually couple years now running is, why is Georgia Tech able to decipher North Carolina's offense and have success? They've done it 2 years in a row. They did it last year. Greg referenced the game. North Carolina's up 17-0, and it just stops at that point. Of course, a long touchdown brought back by penalty. But why do you think Georgia Tech has been able to do that? I know it's completely, it's different players, different staff for both teams at times, but why does Tech seems to have North Carolina's number the last couple of years, you think?
They're stealing signs. No, I'm just kidding. I'm sorry. It's just a timely joke.
Really? Okay, Jim Harbaugh. That, by the way, that is an incredible story.
Yeah.
If folks, I would love to get Greg Barnes on the record talking about that stuff. I mean, that is incredible.
To deviate, not to, we'll get back to the quote, but it is interesting when Bowling Green came to Atlanta and put one on Georgia Tech. I did have some chatter from people on social media, wherever, asking me if I thought that was the case. And I thought, it could have been the case. But now knowing what we know from all this, maybe it really was the case. But I don't want to insinuate anybody's doing anything anywhere. I don't know why Georgia Tech would have North Carolina's number from a defensive / offensive perspective. I mean, we talked about this Boston College Georgia Tech game. I mean, I think Jeff Hafley's won like 9 ACC games and like 3 of those against Georgia Tech, right? Like, I guess just some teams have some teams' number. I can tell you this year that this Georgia Tech defense has a lot of veterans on the back end. They played Drake May last year. Brent Key and a lot of his defensive guys coached against North Carolina last year. So I don't think there's going to be any secrets in that regard. I mean, I think the talent level of North Carolina's offense is probably by and large superior to the talent level of Tech's defense. But maybe it's just, a good matchup for whatever Georgia Tech is doing defensively when they run their sort of 4-2-5 nickel. Maybe that gives North Carolina problems for whatever reason. Because again, I don't think this Georgia Tech defense is world beaters. They're not the best defense by any means in the country. So maybe it's just one of those weird, college football things.
Yeah, just looking at some of the numbers, Georgia Tech is 85th in the country in defensive FEI, which is per possession scoring. And then, Tommy, this will probably surprise you. Just looking at what Georgia Tech has done, you're talking about yards per play. They are last in the ACC in giving up 6.38 yards per play, which is just a tiny bit better than Carolina's defense back in 2014. And the big reason for that, and this is, Chad, I want to ask you about this, is that Georgia Tech is last in the ACC by a significant margin and explosive plays allowed. They've allowed 40 plays of 20-plus yards. BC is next in line at 33. So that's a massive difference. And then you get back to 40-yard plays. Georgia Tech's at 13, which is 2 more than NC State has allowed. So explosive plays, has that been a consistent theme from the defensive coaches in terms of trying to clean up?
Yeah, explosive plays, third down defense, red zone defense, all these things that coaches talk about around the country of having to stop. Georgia Tech hasn't done it. And, they tried to make a switch in defensive coordinator a couple weeks ago. I mean, that sort of made national news when Andrew Thacker went from defensive coordinator to safeties coach, and Kevin Shearer went from linebackers coach to defensive coordinator. And that looked brilliant. They went down and beat Miami. What a move by Brent Key. But then again, they go and give up 38 to Boston College, and Boston College runs for more than 300 yards. It just goes back to this bigger issue of consistency for the whole team. For the defense, time and time again, they can't get off the field on third down. They give up explosive plays. Granted, they played Louisville, Ole Miss, Miami, some big time offenses there. But I've been thinking a lot about this. Is that I wonder if just this maybe just has to do with talent, right? I mean, if Georgia Tech is going to take that next step, let's say they're tier 3 right now, or maybe tier 2. If they want to get to tier 1. You have to boost some of the talent on this defense. I'm not saying the talent is bad, but it needs to be stepped up a little bit, and maybe that's a big reason for some of these big plays.
Yeah, so you bring up a couple of good points there. And in terms of we talked about morale and kind of the team vibe. When you have a change like that, you talk about Thacker. How does that seem to play out in the locker room? Any noticeable difference? Any concerns?
No, and in fact, a few of the guys were pretty defensive about it because a lot of the defensive guys were recruited by Andrew Thacker. I mean, he's a pretty good recruiter, and a lot of, I can't remember which player specifically said, like, I love Coach Thack. He brought me here. I saw a couple social media posts about, giving some love to Coach Andrew Thacker. And even though Kevin Shearer is a new guy in his first year with the program, he's still the linebackers coach at heart. And even though now he's maybe calling the plays overall, I don't think there was like a big, storm inside the locker room to say, hey, we want this guy or we want that guy. A lot of those guys just towed the company line and said, we're just going to continue to go out there and play for whoever's over there. And again, we thought it paid dividends when they go down and beat Miami, but maybe that wasn't the issue, who's defensive coordinator and who isn't.
Yeah, and just taking a step away from this particular game and kind of taking a big picture look. I find the Georgia Tech football program fascinating. A lot of success back in my younger days. And then they make the switch to Paul Johnson. And that was kind of just a unique period. I mean, he had a lot of success, had some really bad years. And you kind of enter this situation where you've got to go through a complete rebuild. Yeah, I guess now in the transfer portal time, it would have been a lot easier, but Jeff Collins didn't have that luxury. And so now Tech's trying to kind of grow out of it. What is the expectation? And again, it could be long-term, but just in terms of the fan base, because it seems like there's so much talent in Georgia. And I understand Georgia's kind of risen up the last decade or so. But even still, there's a ton of talent in the state of Georgia, especially in the Atlanta area. Is this a program that the fan base believes should be winning close to 10 games a year consistently? How would you describe that?
I think so. And it's funny you mentioned Paul Johnson because he'll be honored Saturday. He's going into the College Football Hall of Fame, and he's going to be at the game. He's going to be at the Georgia Southern game on Thursday night. He'll be at the Georgia Tech game on Saturday. So that sort of ties this all together. No, I think the expectations are still there. I mean, excuse me, I took over this beat, in June, and I sort of forgot, being an Atlanta kid, that, Georgia Tech won a national championship in 1990. I mean, granted, it was shared, but that wasn't too long ago. Now, can they get to that level again? I don't know, but I think the fan base is still one that thinks we don't want to be 6-6. We don't want to be 7-5 every year. We're not just happy with winning a bowl game. Like, why can't we win a conference championship like North Carolina is competing to do, like Duke is competing to do, like, Northwestern and Stanford have done in the past? No one is talking about this, academic stuff that maybe people think holds Georgia Tech back. Like you said, there's a million of recruits, in this state and the surrounding states. A lot of them are smart. A lot of them can play football. And so I think the Georgia Tech fan base would sort of shake their head and say, no, we actually do expect to win 9 games and 10 games. And if the coach doesn't do this, then they're going to be out. And I think Jay Batt, the new athletic director, understands that. And I don't think he's going to, just sort of sit back and be patient and give whoever the coach may be 5 to 10 years to get it done. I think they expect to compete and compete at a very high level. And that's the expectation, especially, like you said, this new age of college football. Like, there's no excuses anymore. Like, if you don't go get some transfers to build your roster, like, what are you doing? So I think that makes it probably even tougher for coaches these days. But again, yeah, going around town, I see Georgia Tech stuff everywhere. I talk to a ton of fans. It's not just good try, the old Simpsons line. They barely beat us this time. I mean they expect to be up there and competing for championships.
It's interesting. They don't share that national championship if they don't kick a field goal to tie North Carolina in 1990.
Yeah.
And Mac Brown makes sure everybody understands that Georgia Tech kicked the field goal to tie Carolina. I was at that game actually. 6-4-1 that year, 1990 for North Carolina. Let me ask you. You mentioned transfers, and I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about Nate McCollum. I mean,
Yeah.
this is the new world order in college football, right? Somebody plays forever, is from somewhere, close to somewhere, plays forever for a school, and then ends up across the field on the other sidelines.
Yeah.
Nate will make that trip down to Atlanta. Just sort of speak to his experiences at Georgia Tech, and also what would it be like covering somebody that really is Georgia Tech through and through, but for this year?
Yeah, it is strange world. We talked to LaMiles Brooks, safety on the team, about that, and he said, it's sort of an advantage either way because Nate McCollum is going to know what Georgia Tech's defense is doing a little bit, right? And LaMiles Brooks is going to know where Nate McCollum moves and how he shifts and some of his releases. So, that's that's sort of the world we're in. It's Georgia Tech's got two guys on the roster from Georgia. Like, I didn't think I'd ever see the day, right, where you have arch rivals switching uniforms. So, yeah, it's gonna be. I mean, that's the new world we're living in. I'm sure Nate will probably be thinking about it all week, right? And think he's probably texting some former teammates, and he'll see some coaches, and there'll be some bro hugs on the sideline before and after the game. But I don't know. I just think kids are probably built different these days, right? Like, they probably don't care as much about the color of the jerseys as the fans do, and maybe the reporters do. And they're just going out there to play the game. And I think it'll be a lot of fun for both sides once the whistle blows and the horn sounds. And then afterwards, they'll shake hands like they always do. I don't think there'll be any extra motivation for either side because, again, these kids are switching teams 2-3 times during their career and playing for rivals and playing for conference opponents. And I know he'll want to put on a good show, I'm sure, in that stadium, in front of a bunch of friends and family. But I don't think it'll be any extra motivation for anyone involved.
Yeah, Chad, that's a great point. I do think this is the fact that there's so much transferring that goes on is commonplace. I mean, there's thousands of kids in the portal, so it's not this rarefied air that it once was. Although I will say, in terms of players, in terms of embracing wins and struggling with losses as compared to fans, Roy Williams used to say all the time that fans take losses way harder than players do because they want to win. They're distraught after game, but then they get back and it's time to go out and have a good time and they're ready to move on. And fans let it linger, which is fan is short for fanatic, so that's part of it. All right, before we get you out of here, Chad, Georgia Tech wins this game if these couple of things happen.
They run the ball. I'm going to put the over-under on 100 yards. If they rush for 100 yards, number one, put that out there. And number two, let's give them three takeaways on defense. And whether that's maybe a fumble from Hampton or an interception from Drake May. I think I looked what it's like. I think Drake May has 3 games where he didn't throw a touchdown pass like in his last 20, 21 games. And one of those was against Georgia Tech, right? Like they have got to find a way to harass him, control him. You're not going to keep him down, but maybe get a deflected ball for an interception and then run the ball consistently and efficiently. If they do those couple things, I think they have a real good chance of winning this game.
It'll be an interesting one. It's Halloween week. Getting close to that.
You say it's Halloween, but it's going to be like 81 degrees.
I know, but
I don't know if it is. I don't know. Don't bring a sweater. Just
really?
Drink some coffee for this 8 o'clock kick, and or maybe a spiced latte. But I mean, I don't know if it's Halloween or not. It does not seem like it.
It is Halloween in the South. How about that? It is Halloween on the calendar, and of course, Atlanta has been a rough place to play for North Carolina. Shout out to Chad Bishop, Atlanta Journal-Constitution. He's at Mr. Chad Bishop on Twitter or X, whatever you folks want to call it. I appreciate you taking time to join Greg and I. It's always good to hear the other side of the coin. We have an echo chamber up here, and a lot of times we need to get out of the room and talk to others. So I appreciate you taking the time, my man.
Yeah, thank you guys. Have me anytime. All right.
Indeed.
Yeah, thanks,
shout out to Greg Barnes. Shout out to Johnny T-Shirt. Shout out to Congruity for taking care of us on the sponsor side. We'll be back next week with another Next Level.